You ever notice how the smallest things in life can trigger the biggest storms? For me, it was a flag. Just an old, slightly faded American flag that I'd carried through 3 deployments overseas and finally raised outside my home when I retired. I never thought that hanging it on the small pole by my porch would ignite one of the wildest HOA revenge stories I'd ever be a part of. But that's exactly what happened. And you won't believe how far the Homeowners Association went to try to tear me down. Now, let me set the scene. I'm a retired veteran, 68 years old, living in a quiet Texas suburb. My wife passed a few years back, and the house feels a little emptier these days. But the neighbors are decent folks. We wave when we walk dogs, swap casseroles at holidays. The usual suburban rhythm. I'd worked hard for this house, 25 years of service, decades of scrimping and saving, and all I wanted in retirement was a little peace. But peace and homeowners associations don't mix. Not when there's a Karen at the wheel. Our HOA president, Linda, was exactly the type you're picturing. Mid-50s, never without her oversized sunglasses and clipboard, strutting around the neighborhood like a self-appointed sheriff. She loved rules more than most people love their children. She was the type who'd measure your grass with a ruler and fine you $50 if it dared to grow half an inch over regulation. Folks whispered about her behind closed doors, but no one stood up to her. Until I did without even meaning to. It started on Memorial Day. I'd mounted the flagpole myself, a sturdy aluminum bracket by my porch. As the breeze caught the stars and stripes, I felt that old tug in my chest, the one that reminded me of the buddies who never made it home, of nights spent under desert skies, of what that fabric actually meant. For me, it wasn't just cloth. It was memory, sacrifice, family. 2 days later, a letter showed up in my mailbox. Dear Mr. Thompson, it read in stiff, bold letters. Your recent installation of an unauthorized flagpole violates HOA Regulation 14B. You are hereby required to remove said item within 7 days or face fines of $200 per day. I laughed at first. A flag? Illegal? Surely this was some clerical error. I called the number at the bottom of the letter, and wouldn't you know it, Linda herself answered. HO office, this is Linda. Hi Linda, this is George Thompson, over on Maple Lane. I think there's been a mistake. I received a notice about my flagpole. Not a mistake, she cut in, her voice dripping with self-importance. That flagpole is non-compliant. All exterior fixtures must be pre-approved. You didn't submit a request. It's an American flag, I said, stunned. Are you telling me I can't fly the flag I served under for 25 years? You can fly a flag, she said, but only on the small garden size poles we allow. What you've installed is permanent hardware. Remove it, or the fines begin Monday. I gripped the phone tighter. Ma'am, with all due respect, the law protects homeowners' rights to display the American flag. You can't override federal law with a neighborhood bylaw. There was a pause. Then her smug reply, we'll see about that. Click. Pause here if you're already raging, because I sure was. And tell me, what would you do if your HOA told you your flag was illegal? The days that followed felt like a bad sitcom. Monday morning, I found a bright orange violation notice stuck to my door like a scarlet letter. By Wednesday, Linda was patrolling past my house with her camera, snapping photos like she was building a case for the FBI. By Friday, I got the next letter. Your account has been assessed 1-0 in fines for continued noncompliance. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter trembling in my hand. That was nearly half my monthly pension. I thought about my grandkids, who loved running in my yard under that flag. I thought about my wife, who used to tease me about polishing the pole before holidays. And I thought about every man and woman I'd saluted over the years. Removing that flag felt like spitting on their memory. So I made a choice. I wasn't backing down. But here's where it gets interesting. A neighbor of mine, a young lawyer named Rachel, knocked on my door that weekend. George, she said, I saw Linda leaving papers on your porch. What's going on? I showed her the letters, my hands shaking with frustration. She read them carefully, her brows rising higher with each line. Finally, she set them down and gave me a grin that I'll never forget. They've messed with the wrong veteran, she said. George, this isn't just petty, it's illegal. If you're willing, I'll help you fight this. In court. My heart thumped. Court? Over a flag? But then she added, "You could set a precedent. You could stop her from bullying every other family here. Don't you think it's time someone stood up to this HOA?" I thought about it long into the night. About the neighbors too scared to speak, the families fined for flower pots or Christmas lights, about the tears I'd seen in Mrs. Jenkins' eyes when she had to remove her son's memorial bench from her yard. I set my jaw. "Let's do it," I told Rachel the next morning. "If they want to fight, they'll get one." And just like that, my quiet retirement turned into the battle of my life. The HOA thought they could bleed me with fines, bully me into submission, but they had no idea who they were up against. The first hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. That gave Linda plenty of time to stir the pot. Flyers went out accusing me of destabilizing community harmony. She told neighbors I was risking everyone's property values. She even hinted that if I lost, the HOA could foreclose on my house to collect the fines. That was the moment the stakes got real. My house, the only place that still smelled faintly of my wife's perfume, was on the line. But I had something Linda didn't. I had the law, a determined young lawyer, and a story that resonated deeper than any bylaw ever could. You won't believe what happened when we walked into that courtroom. But that's for the next chapter. Before I stop here, let me ask, do you think the judge will side with a stubborn HOA or a veteran defending his right to fly the flag? Drop your prediction in the comments, because this is only the beginning of the fight. HOA. If this made you mad already, smash that like button. And tell me, should HOAs even have the power to ban flags? Yes or no? The morning of the hearing, I stood in front of the mirror adjusting my tie, an old navy blue one my wife had given me for our 30th anniversary. My hands trembled, not from nerves, but from the weight of what this day meant. This wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about a flag. This was about every homeowner who'd ever been bullied by a homeowners association that thought its rules were above the law. When I stepped outside, my flag caught the morning sun, rippling proudly in the Texas breeze. For a second, I swear it felt like the cloth itself whispered, "Don't give up." Rachel pulled up in her dusty gray sedan, files stacked high in the back seat. She looked sharp in her suit, hair pulled back, eyes bright with determination. "You ready, soldier?" she asked with a grin. I chuckled. "Haven't been called that in years." "Then today, you're reporting for duty." The courthouse was only 20 minutes away, but it felt like a march into enemy territory. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and coffee. Folks whispered in the pews, waiting for their cases. And then there she was, Linda, perched at the front with her clipboard, lips pursed so tight they nearly disappeared. She didn't come alone. 2 other board members flanked her like lieutenants, all self-important and smug. When she saw me, she gave a smile colder than a January dawn. "George," she said, her voice dripping fake sweetness, "I hope you brought your checkbook." Rachel leaned close and whispered, "Don't take the bait. Let her dig her own grave." The bailiff called our case. Homeowners Association of Maple Grove versus George Thompson. I walked to the front, my boots echoing against the tile. My stomach clenched, but I kept my chin high. I wasn't just fighting for me, I was fighting for something bigger. The judge was a middle-aged man with sharp glasses and a tired expression, the kind that told you he'd seen a lifetime of petty squabbles. He shuffled the papers. "All right, let's hear it." "Ho, you go first." Linda stood, smoothing her blazer like she was on trial for the presidency. "Your Honor, this homeowner has installed a permanent fixture and unauthorized flagpole without prior approval from the board. Our bylaws are clear. Such actions disrupt uniformity, diminish property values, and jeopardize the integrity of our community." She spoke like she was reciting scripture, each word clipped and self-righteous. "We have issued fines as permitted under Section 8C, and we request that the court enforce payment and authorize further penalties, including foreclosure if necessary." The room stirred. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. Foreclosure? Over a flag? When it was our turn, Rachel stood gracefully. "Your Honor, my client is not some reckless rule breaker. He is a veteran who has served this country for 25 years. He simply wished to fly the American flag outside his home, as is his right under federal law. The freedom to display, the American Flag Act of 2005, specifically prohibits HOAs from banning the display of the U.S. flag. She held up a copy of the act, the pages highlighted in yellow. The HOA's fines are not only excessive, they are illegal. They have threatened to foreclose on his home for exercising a federally protected right. This is not about property values. This is about power and abuse of it. The judge leaned forward. Is that true, Miss President? You threatened foreclosure? Linda shifted in her heels. It's within our rights, Your Honor. Not when federal law says otherwise. Rachel shot back. Her voice carried, clear and strong. I couldn't help but feel proud this young woman, fighting tooth and nail for a cause bigger than herself. The judge sighed. I'll need to review the act. But from what I've heard, it sounds like the HOA has overstepped. Do you have evidence of damages to property values from this flagpole? Linda fumbled. Well, no, but it disrupts uniformity. Uniformity, the judge repeated flatly, is not a legal standard. Now here's the twist no one saw coming. Just as we thought the hearing was wrapping up, Linda pulled out a stack of photos. Your Honor, this flag is not only unauthorized, it is faded, tattered, and unsightly. It disrespects the very symbol he claims to honor. Gasps echoed in the room. My jaw clenched. That flag wasn't tattered, it was worn, yes, but with the history of battles fought and friends lost. To hear her call it unsightly felt like a punch to the gut. The judge looked at the photo, then looked at me. Mr. Thompson, is this accurate? I stood tall. Your Honor, that flag flew over my base in Afghanistan. It was folded and handed to me when my unit came home. Some of the men whose hands raised it never made it back. Yes, it's worn, but it's not unsightly. It's a reminder of sacrifice. I clean it every week. I've treated it with more respect than Linda has ever treated her neighbors. The room went silent. Even Linda's own board members shifted uncomfortably. Rachel put a steady hand on my arm, whispering, "Perfectly said." The judge leaned back, expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. I'll issue my ruling within 10 days. Until then, Mr. Thompson may keep his flag flying. We walked out of that courtroom with our heads high. The neighbors who'd come to watch shook my hand, slapped my back, whispered, "We're rooting for you." For the first time, I realized I wasn't fighting this battle alone. But Linda wasn't done. Oh no, she was only getting started. That evening, a fresh violation notice appeared on my door. Not for the flag this time, but for improper lawn maintenance. The next day, it was unauthorized bird feeder. By the weekend, she'd piled on 6 new violations, each carrying steep fines. It was clear, if she couldn't beat me in court, she'd try to drown me in paperwork and fees. But she underestimated one thing. With Rachel's help, I was keeping every letter, every violation, every photo. We were building a case. And what came next would expose Linda's entire operation in a way that left her wishing she'd never come after me in the first place. Before we get there, let me ask you, if your HOA lost in court but kept harassing you anyway, would you move or fight back harder? Drop your thoughts below. And don't go anywhere, because in the next chapter, Linda's harassment backfires in a way that makes this one of the most unbelievable HOA revenge stories you'll ever hear. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button, because you won't want to miss what happens when a Karen with too much power finally crosses the line. I wish I could tell you that after the hearing, things quieted down, that Linda accepted the judge's words and went back to measuring people's grass in peace. But that's not how HOA revenge stories play out. If anything, losing her grip on my flag seemed to light a fire under her. And when a Karen like Linda feels cornered, she doesn't back off, she doubles down. The first new violation appeared the very next morning. A bright yellow slip taped to my door like some sort of scarlet badge of shame. Violation: lawn exceeds community standard for uniformity. Fine: $100 per day. I stared out at my yard. Grass trimmed neat, flower beds edged, not a dandelion in sight. My neighbor Frank, watering his roses across the street, hollered, "George, your lawn looks better than mine. What's she talking about?" I held up the notice. Apparently, my blades of grass aren't uniform enough. Frank just shook his head. That woman's lost it. The next day, another violation. Unauthorized bird feeder visible from street. A bird feeder. My grandkids loved filling it when they visited, watching cardinals and finches swoop in. Now it was a $150 fine. By the end of the week, I had 6 new citations: improper mailbox paint, fence discoloration, unapproved porch chair, each one more absurd than the last. Rachel came by with a stack of folders, her eyes gleaming like a detective cracking a case. "George, don't throw these away. Keep them all." She's building a paper trail, but what she doesn't realize is we're building one too. I spread the letters across my dining table. "Feels like I'm under siege, Rachel. I can't keep paying fines every time a sparrow sneezes on my lawn." She leaned forward. "And you won't. We're going to use her own obsession against her." That's when we started documenting everything. I bought a small notebook, carried it in my pocket like I used to carry a field log. Every time I saw Linda lurking with her camera, I jotted the date and time. Every notice I received, I made a copy. Rachel showed me how to request official HOA financial records, something most homeowners don't realize they're entitled to by law. And oh boy, when those records came back, we found a gold mine. Hidden among the neat columns of dues and expenses were administrative costs that didn't add up. Thousands of dollars listed under vague categories like community improvements and special services. Yet, no improvements were visible. No new playgrounds, no repaired sidewalks. Just money vanishing into thin air. Rachel tapped the page with her pen. "This is it, George. She's not just harassing you. She's mismanaging funds or worse." I felt a slow grin spread across my face. "You're telling me the HOA Karen might be stealing from the very neighbors she claims to protect?" Rachel smirked. "Looks that way." But the best was yet to come. One evening, as I was sitting on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the flag sway in the wind, Frank shuffled over, carrying a manila envelope. "George," he said, lowering his voice, "I probably shouldn't be sharing this, but my niece babysits for one of the board members. He left these minutes out on the counter." She snapped a picture. Inside were notes from a closed-door HOA board meeting. And wouldn't you know it, right there in black and white was Linda's plan. Strategic enforcement against Thompson until compliance achieved. Escalate fines to pressure foreclosure if necessary. My hands trembled with fury. They weren't just trying to shut me up, they were plotting to take my house, my wife's garden, my family's gathering place. I slammed the paper down on the table. "That's it. No more playing defense. It's time we go on the attack." Rachel's eyes lit up. "I was hoping you'd say that." From that day forward, we became relentless. Every violation Linda sent, we logged. Every threat she made, we recorded. I even installed a small camera on my porch. And sure enough, one night around midnight, the footage caught Linda herself sneaking up my driveway, clipboard in hand, peering at my mailbox with a flashlight. The next morning, I showed the clip to Rachel. "Looks like she's got a hobby." Rachel laughed. "Looks like we've got evidence of harassment." But here's where the first big twist came in. As word spread around the neighborhood about what Linda was doing to me, people started knocking on my door. Mrs. Jenkins, who'd lost her memorial bench. The Ramirez family, fined for their Christmas lights. Even the quiet couple down the street, who'd been slapped with fees for their toddler's inflatable pool. One by one, they shared their stories. Each tale more outrageous than the last. Each one painting a picture of a woman drunk on power, hiding behind bylaws to line her own pockets. That's when I realized it wasn't just my fight anymore. It was the community's. I stood in my living room, neighbors packed shoulder to shoulder, voices buzzing with anger and hope. I raised my hand for silence. "Folks," I said, "they tried to break me with fines. They tried to strip me of my flag. They even threatened to take my house. But what they didn't count on was us standing together. This isn't just about me, it's about every single one of you who's been bullied by this board. And I say it's time we fight back, together." The room erupted in cheers. For the first time, people weren't whispering about Linda in fear. They were ready to act. And that's when Rachel dropped the bombshell. "We don't just have a defense anymore, we have a case. A real lawsuit. If you're all willing to testify, we can take this HOA down for harassment, abuse of power, and financial misconduct." A hush fell. Then Mrs. Jenkins raised her hand. "I'll testify." "Me too," said Frank. One by one, hands went up, until the entire room was united. The HOA had declared war on me, but they just awakened an army. "Before we take this into the courtroom again, I want to hear from you. Do you think neighbors banding together can really topple an abusive HOA? Or do these boards always find a way to wriggle out? Tell me below, I read every comment. And stick around, because in the next chapter, we take Linda and her cronies to court again. And this time, the secrets we expose will make your jaw drop. If you're loving this fight for suburban justice, don't forget to hit like. It tells YouTube to show this story to more folks who've been HOA'd. I'll never forget that night in my living room. What started as a few frustrated neighbors venting over coffee turned into a rallying cry. It felt less like a neighborhood meeting and more like a war council. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. Mrs. Jenkins, bless her heart, stood up with her cane and said, "George, when my son died, I just wanted a bench in my yard so I could sit and remember him. Linda fined me $500 and told me rules are rules. I paid it because I didn't know what else to do, but I'll be damned if I let her do the same to you." Frank chimed in. "She threatened foreclosure on me over a barbecue pit, said the smoke was a hazard. George, I've lived here 25 years, and that woman has made life miserable for all of us." One by one, the stories spilled out: Christmas lights called excessive displays, kids' chalk drawings labeled graffiti, and even a family fined for planting sunflowers because they were too tall. Rachel, ever the tactician, took notes furiously. She looked up finally, her eyes burning. "This isn't random. This is a pattern. She's targeting homeowners with bogus fines, and she's been doing it for years. If we can get enough testimonies, we'll have a case not just for harassment, but for financial misconduct and abuse of authority." That word misconduct sent a ripple through the room. People leaned in closer, their frustration sparking into something stronger. Hope. I raised my voice. "Neighbors, we've been living in fear of her clipboard for too long. We pay our dues, we keep our homes, and still she treats us like criminals. Tonight, that ends. We're not just going to defend ourselves, we're going to take back our neighborhood." The cheer that erupted rattled my picture frames. For the first time in years, I saw smiles instead of worried frowns on my neighbors' faces. We weren't just isolated families anymore, we were a community. The next weeks were a whirlwind. Rachel organized everything like a general preparing for battle. She had neighbors sign affidavits, collected copies of violation notices, and even subpoenaed HOA financials. And let me tell you, the more we dug, the uglier it got. Remember those administrative costs we found? Turns out Linda had been funneling HOA funds into her own consulting firm. Thousands of dollars money we thought was going to neighborhood upkeep was padding her pockets. Rachel slapped the papers on my kitchen table. "She's embezzling, George. And when the court sees this, she won't just lose her position, she could lose everything." I couldn't believe it. All those years of her standing on porches, lecturing us about community standards, and she'd been the one breaking laws behind our backs. The hypocrisy was staggering. Meanwhile, Linda must have sensed the storm gathering, because she escalated her harassment. I started getting letters almost daily. One accused me of excessive noise, even though I live alone and my TV rarely climbs above a whisper. Another claimed my porch light was a safety hazard. It got so ridiculous that my neighbors actually started laughing about it. Frank would walk by and shout, "Hey George, better check your mailbox color. She'll say it's an act of rebellion." But behind the laughter was steel. Every fresh violation only added fuel to the fire. Every threat she made only united us tighter. Finally, the day of the big hearing arrived. This wasn't just about me anymore, it was about the entire neighborhood versus the board. We filled the courtroom pews shoulder to shoulder. It felt like half the subdivision had shown up, faces set with quiet determination. When Linda strutted in, clipboard clutched like a scepter, she froze at the sight. Dozens of her subjects staring her down. No fear, no submission, just resolve. Rachel leaned over to me and whispered, "This is it, George. This is where everything changes." The judge banged his gavel. "Court is in session. Case of Thompson and residents of Maple Grove versus the Maple Grove Homeowners Association." And that's when we dropped the bombshell. Rachel stood tall, her voice calm but powerful. "Your Honor, this case began with one veteran's right to fly the American flag. But it has grown into something much larger. This HOA has systematically targeted residents with fabricated violations, levied unlawful fines, and misappropriated funds for personal gain. We have testimony from over a dozen homeowners, financial records showing embezzlement, and even video evidence of board members trespassing onto private property at night to manufacture violations. She handed the judge a thick binder, heavy as a brick. This is not just homeowners association drama. This is harassment. This is fraud, and it must end. The courtroom buzzed like a hive. Linda's face drained of color. For once, she had no smug smile, no rehearsed lines. She was caught, and she knew it. But before the judge could respond, Linda slammed her clipboard on the table. "This is a witch hunt," she shouted. "These people are liars. They don't respect the rules. They don't respect the community." The judge raised a hand. "Enough. I will review this evidence carefully. Until then, all fines levied against Mr. Thompson and the plaintiffs are suspended. And given the seriousness of these allegations, I am ordering an independent audit of the HOA's finances." The room erupted. Cheers, applause, even a few tears. For the first time in years, we had the upper hand. We walked out of that courtroom not just as neighbors, but as victors of the first battle. The war wasn't over, but Linda had been put on notice. Her reign of fear was crumbling, and the truth was finally coming to light. As we stood on the courthouse steps, Rachel turned to me with a grin. "George, this is bigger than any of us thought. When that audit report comes back, she won't just lose her seat, she might lose her freedom." I looked up at the flag waving on the courthouse pole, sunlight gleaming off the stars. For the first time in a long while, I felt something powerful in my chest. Not just pride, not just relief, hope. Before I close this chapter, let me ask you, if your HOA president was caught funneling money from the neighborhood into their own pocket, would you push for removal or prison? Let me know in the comments. I want to see where you stand. And stick around, because in the next chapter, the audit results come in. And when they do, the entire neighborhood learns just how deep Linda's corruption really goes. If you think Neighbors Standing Together is the ultimate suburban justice tale, smash that like button. It tells YouTube you want more HOA revenge stories like this. When the judge ordered that independent audit, I figured it would take weeks, maybe months before we heard anything. Turns out, we didn't have to wait long at all. 3 weeks later, a thick manila envelope showed up in my mailbox, stamped with the seal of the state auditor's office. Just seeing it made my pulse kick up. I carried it inside like it was made of glass, laid it down on the kitchen table, and called Rachel right away. She came over within the hour, laptop under one arm, determination under the other. We sat side by side as I slit the envelope open. The papers inside were dense with numbers, but Rachel's eyes scanned them like a hawk. And then she froze. "Oh my God, what is it?" I asked, leaning closer. "George, this isn't just a little financial funny business. This is theft, and not small time either." She tapped the page with her pen. Over 80, zero in dues and fines redirected into a consulting company that Linda owns. Another 20, zero billed as landscaping improvements that never happened. And look at this, security services? That's her brother's business. She's been funneling community money straight into her family's pockets. I blinked. 80 grand? Rachel, that's stealing from every neighbor on this street. Rachel nodded grimly. And it gets worse. The audit notes she failed to file mandatory state reports for 3 years. If she thought no one would ever check, she was right, until now. By the time we finished reading, my hands were shaking with fury. All those fines, all those threats, she hadn't been enforcing rules. She'd been running a racket. I called Frank first, then Mrs. Jenkins, then half a dozen other neighbors who'd been part of our group. Within hours, my living room was packed again, everyone clutching a copy of the audit. Gasps, curses, even tears filled the air as they realized just how deep the betrayal ran. Mrs. Jenkins gripped the papers with trembling hands. She took my money for that bench. She made me feel like a criminal. And all the while, she was the thief. Frank slammed his fist on the arm of my recliner. She threatened my house. My house! Over barbecue smoke while she was robbing us blind. Rachel stood in front of the group like a general addressing her troops. Folks, this isn't just grounds for removal. This is grounds for prosecution. With this audit, we can petition the court to dissolve the board. freeze HOA accounts, and refer Linda for criminal charges. But we'll need all of you to stand up with me in front of the judge. Without hesitation, every single person raised their hand. And just when we thought it couldn't get any crazier, the first viral twist hit. A teenager down the street kid named Tyler had been filming the whole courthouse scene on his phone weeks earlier. He posted a clip of Linda slamming her clipboard, screaming about a witch hunt. It spread like wildfire. By the time the audit landed, the video had over 300 views on social media. Suddenly, our quiet little neighborhood drama wasn't so quiet anymore. Reporters started calling. "Mr. Thompson, can you comment on the HOA scandal? Mr. Thompson, is it true you're a veteran fighting for your right to fly the American flag?" I never thought my retirement years would include microphones shoved in my face, but there I was, telling anyone who'd listen, this isn't about me. It's about a community standing up to abuse. It's about justice. The pressure built fast. Linda tried to counter with her own spin, emailing the neighborhood that the audit was biased and misinterpreted. But no one bought it. Too much had been revealed. The second hearing arrived like a thunderstorm on the horizon. Once again, the courtroom filled with neighbors, this time with even more spectators, and even a reporter scribbling notes. Rachel rose first. Calm. Steady. "Your Honor, the audit confirms what we suspected: financial misconduct, embezzlement, and fraudulent use of HOA funds. This board has lost the trust of its community and violated its fiduciary duty. We ask that the court freeze all HOA accounts, remove the current board, and appoint an independent receiver until a new election can be held." The judge flipped through the audit pages, his brow furrowing deeper with every line. Finally, he turned to Linda. "What do you have to say for yourself?" Linda stood, her hands trembling just enough to betray her composure. "Your Honor, these accusations are exaggerated. The audit is flawed. Every expense was approved." "Approved by whom?" the judge cut in. She hesitated. "By the board." Rachel pounced. "A board that she controls, with members handpicked by her. That's not oversight. That's collusion." The judge slammed his gavel. "Enough. The court hereby orders all HOA operations suspended pending further investigation. Funds are to be frozen. Ms. Linda, you are removed as HOA president effective immediately, pending potential criminal charges." Gasps filled the room. Neighbors clapped. Some even hugged. And there it was, the first crushing blow. The tyrant of Maple Grove had been toppled. But as we walked out of the courthouse, Rachel leaned close and whispered, "George, don't get too comfortable. People like Linda don't go down quietly. She's going to fight back with everything she's got." Sure enough, the very next day, an anonymous flyer appeared in every mailbox in the neighborhood. Bold letters screamed, "They want to bankrupt your community." Below it, a picture of me standing by my flag, with words accusing me of being the reason dues will skyrocket. It was a smear campaign. Linda wasn't done yet. Before I tell you how we handled that, let me ask you, what would you do if your corrupt HOA president started smearing your name publicly after being exposed? Stay quiet or fire back? Drop your thoughts below. I want to hear them. And stay tuned, because in the next chapter, we launch our counter-strike, and Linda faces the kind of neighborhood backlash she never saw coming. If this story gave you that sweet taste of suburban justice, hit like right now and share it with a friend who's ever been HOA'd. When I pulled that flyer out of my mailbox, I almost laughed. There it was, my face in grainy black and white, printed like I was some kind of outlaw on a wanted poster. The headline screamed, "Don't let George destroy Maple Grove." Beneath it, bold letters accused me of stirring up chaos, wasting HOA funds on witch hunts, and my personal favorite, planning to bankrupt hardworking families with endless lawsuits. I carried it inside and slapped it down on the kitchen table. Rachel arrived minutes later, holding her own copy. She looked furious. "She's desperate," Rachel muttered, pacing. "This is classic deflection. Paint yourself as the victim, and your accuser as the villain. Problem is, she's underestimating the fact that people here actually like you, George." I snorted. "Well, except the guy who hates my lawn gnome." That earned a half smile, but Rachel's eyes sharpened. "No jokes. We can't let her control the narrative. If she's waging a PR war, we fight back. But not with mud, with truth. That night, we gathered the neighbors again: Frank, Mrs. Jenkins, Tyler with his ever-present phone, and half a dozen others. The flyers were spread out across my coffee table like pieces of evidence in a crime show. "This isn't just about me," I told them. "If she can smear me today, she can smear you tomorrow. We need to show the community who's really been bankrupting this place." Rachel raised her laptop. "I've drafted a public letter. Straight facts, no spin. Audit numbers, the judge's ruling, and a simple message. Accountability isn't the enemy of Maple Grove, it's the only way to save it." Frank grinned. "And I can print it for pennies at the shop. We'll beat her at her own game." Tyler piped up. "Or better, we make a video. People scroll past letters, but they'll watch a story. I can cut together clips from the courthouse, add screenshots of the audit. We'll post it everywhere: Facebook groups, neighborhood forums, next door. Let her flyers rot in the recycling bin." For a second, the room went quiet. We were just ordinary folks, retirees, parents, teenagers. None of us had ever planned a counteroffensive like this, but the spark had been lit. "All right," I said finally. "Let's do it." 2 days later, our response dropped. Tyler's video was simple but powerful. Neighbors giving short, heartfelt statements, the audit figures highlighted on screen, footage of Linda slamming her clipboard in the courthouse. It ended with Mrs. Jenkins' trembling voice saying, "I paid fines I didn't owe. I was humiliated. And now we know why, because someone was stealing from all of us. Don't let this be swept under the rug." The effect was immediate. Comments poured in. "About time. We always knew something was off. Thank you for standing up." The local news station even picked it up, running a short segment titled, "Neighborhood Uprising. OA President Accused of Misconduct." Meanwhile, Linda's flyers went limp. People tossed them aside, muttering about her lies and how she's done for. But the real turning point came the following Saturday. Maple Grove had its annual community picnic, the one event that even Linda hadn't managed to ruin completely over the years. This time, though, she showed up in a pastel suit, plastered smile, trying to work the crowd. I watched from the shade as she made her rounds, shaking hands, laughing too loudly, pretending nothing had happened. But one by one, people pulled away. Some turned their backs. Others confronted her outright. Mrs. Jenkins, cane in hand, marched up to Linda and said loud enough for half the park to hear, "You took my money, Linda. You don't get to take my dignity, too." The air shifted. Conversations hushed. All eyes turned. Linda tried to laugh it off, but then Frank stepped forward. "You threatened to take my house over barbecue smoke. Meanwhile, you were stealing from every single family here. You should be ashamed." A murmur spread through the crowd. Then someone clapped. Then another. Within seconds, the entire picnic erupted in applause, not for Linda, but for the people calling her out. She froze, that smile cracking for the first time. And for the first time since this war began, I saw it in her eyes. Fear. The smear campaign hadn't just failed. It had backfired. Spectacularly. That night, as I sat on my porch with Rachel, the crickets buzzing in the humid air, she looked at me and said, "We've won the neighborhood. Now, it's time to win the war." And she was right. Because if the audit was Act 1, and the smear campaign Act 2, Act 3 was coming fast. The criminal investigation. The state wasn't done with Linda. And soon, neither was the law. Before I dive into that, let me ask you, if your neighbors turned on a corrupt HOA president right in the middle of a community picnic, what would you do? Cheer, stay quiet, or confront them yourself? Drop your answer in the comments below. And buckle up, because in Chapter 7, the sheriff comes knocking, and Linda's empire begins to crumble in ways even I didn't see coming. If this story gave you chills of sweet justice, make sure you tap that like button. It really helps this story reach more folks who've dealt with HOA nightmares. The call came on a Tuesday morning, just after I'd finished my first cup of coffee. Rachel's voice was calm, but I could hear the electricity buzzing under her words. "They've moved forward," she said. "The county prosecutor filed charges. Embezzlement, fraud, misuse of funds, it's all there." I sat back, my heart pounding. "So, what happens now?" They're sending the sheriff. By late afternoon, Maple Grove had gathered on its own. Word travels fast in a neighborhood, and this news was gasoline on a fire. People lined sidewalks, peeked out of windows, some openly holding their phones ready to record. It felt like the climax of a movie, but this was real life. At 4:17 p.m., the White County Sheriff's SUV rolled slowly down Sycamore Lane. Conversations hushed. Children were pulled back onto porches. And there she was, Linda, standing in her driveway, arms crossed, a smug grin on her face, as if she had been expecting this and was already plotting her victory speech. The sheriff stepped out, flanked by a deputy. He wasn't dramatic, no lights, no sirens, but his very presence shifted the air. He walked up, papers in hand, and spoke clearly enough that those nearest could hear. Linda Harrison, you are under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and misappropriation of association funds. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones went up. Linda threw her head back and laughed. This is ridiculous. I am Maple Grove. You can't do this to me. She looked around for allies, but all she found were neighbors, staring at her neighbors. She had fined, threatened, bullied. Please, Mrs. Jenkins said from her porch, voice trembling but strong. Take her. The sheriff nodded to his deputy, who produced the cuffs. That was when Linda cracked. She pulled back, shrieking, Don't touch me! This is harassment! You'll all regret this! But the deputy was steady, guiding her arms behind her back. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was sharp, final. The HOA tyrant of Maple Grove, who once fined me $100 for having my trash can visible for 5 minutes too long, was now being led away, her power dissolving in front of everyone she had tormented. Rachel appeared at my side, her eyes locked on the scene. This is it, George, the end of her reign. But she was wrong, because as the sheriff's SUV pulled away, I couldn't shake the feeling gnawing in my gut. Linda wasn't the type to go down quietly. If she had been stealing for years, there was no way she'd left herself completely exposed. She was too cunning for that. And sure enough, later that evening, Rachel and I got a text from Frank. Check your email. Urgent. I opened it, and my blood ran cold. Attached was a scanned document Linda had apparently filed weeks earlier, some kind of special amendment hidden deep in HOA records. It claimed that any legal costs incurred by the HOA or its officers would be reimbursed by the association, meaning by us, the homeowners. If it held up, even though she was arrested, we could still be on the hook for her legal defense. It wasn't over, not by a long shot. That night, sitting in the dim glow of my porch light, I felt the weight of it all. We had won the moral battle. The neighborhood had turned. The sheriff had taken her away, but now came the legal war. Rachel leaned forward, her voice low. We've exposed her. Now we have to make sure she doesn't take us down with her. And George, this is going to get uglier before it gets better. She was right. Linda wasn't just fighting for power anymore, she was fighting for her freedom. And she was willing to drag the entire neighborhood down with her if that's what it took. Before I tell you how we dismantled her last-ditch scheme, let me ask you, if you found out your HOA president had been arrested, but you might still be forced to pay their legal bills, what would you do? Fight it? Move out? Or rally the neighbors for one last stand? Because in Chapter 8, that's exactly what we faced. And trust me, the fight to block Linda's poison pill amendment was the most brutal battle of all. If seeing Linda in cuffs gave you a surge of satisfaction, hit that like button. It fuels this channel and keeps the stories coming. The morning after Linda's arrest, Maple Grove felt different. The air was lighter. People waved at each other again. Children played in the cul-de-sac without their parents nervously looking over their shoulders for rule violations. For the first time in years, it felt like a neighborhood and not a dictatorship. But then reality came crashing down in the form of that amendment Frank had uncovered. Rachel spread the printed copy across my kitchen table like it was evidence in a courtroom drama. She slipped this in months ago, she explained, tapping the section highlighted in yellow. Any and all legal fees incurred by the HOA or its officers shall be reimbursed by the association. Frank slammed his fist on the table. It means we'd be paying for her lawyers even while she's sitting in jail. Every bill, every filing, every courtroom appearance. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. It was like Linda had planted a bomb in our bylaws, one last trap in case her empire collapsed. By noon, Rachel called an emergency neighborhood meeting at the community center. The room was packed, every chair filled, people standing in the back, arms crossed, jaws tight. I had never seen this many neighbors willingly gather since Linda took power. Rachel stood at the front with a microphone, her presence steady and commanding. Friends, we've made progress, but Linda anticipated this moment. She planted what's called a poison pill amendment, a clause designed to protect her at our expense. If we don't act, we'll all be funding her defense. A murmur swept through the crowd. Mr. Coleman raised his hand. Isn't there anything we can do? Can't we vote it out? Rachel nodded. Yes, but it won't be easy. According to the bylaws, any amendment requires a 2/3 majority of all homeowners, not just those present here tonight, and Linda's allies will fight us tooth and nail. I glanced around the room. People were fired up, but I also saw hesitation. We were tired. We had already gone through so much. But if we didn't stop this, Linda would continue draining us from behind bars. That week became a blur of door-to-door conversations, phone calls, and late-night strategy sessions. Rachel, Frank, and I split up the streets, knocking on doors with copies of the amendment in hand. Some neighbors signed immediately, eager to cut the last thread of Linda's control. Others hesitated, worried that challenging the amendment might drag them into more legal battles. And then there were the die-hard Linda loyalists, the ones who still believed she had been misunderstood or framed. I'll never forget one encounter with Mr. Daniels, who had always been a quiet supporter of Linda. He listened, arms folded, while I explained how the amendment worked. So, you're telling me, he said slowly, that even though she's the one being charged, we'd be paying her lawyers? Yes, I said, even if she's convicted. He let out a low whistle, shook his head, and signed without another word. By Friday night, we had collected signatures from nearly 70% of homeowners, just over the threshold we needed. The tension in the community center during the official vote was palpable. When Rachel finally announced the result, the amendment is repealed. The room erupted. Cheers, applause, even tears. For the first time, Maple Grove wasn't just surviving Linda's tyranny. We were reclaiming our neighborhood. But as the celebration died down, Rachel's phone buzzed. She checked the message, her face darkening. What is it? I asked. She handed me the screen. It was a notice from Linda's attorney. Be advised, Ms. Harrison intends to file a countersuit against the Maple Grove OA for harassment and wrongful termination of her role as president. I swallowed hard. Even in custody, Linda wasn't finished. She was going to drag this out in court, using every trick in the book to claw back control or at least to punish us for daring to fight her. That night, I sat on my porch again, listening to the quiet hum of crickets. For the first time in weeks, the neighborhood felt peaceful, but I knew it was temporary. We had dismantled her poison pill. We had stood together and won. But Linda wasn't a woman who gave up. She was cornered, and a cornered animal is dangerous. Rachel joined me, lowering herself into the chair beside mine. George, she said softly, this isn't just about bylaws anymore. This is about survival. We need to be ready for the courtroom battle of our lives. I nodded slowly. She was right. Linda had lost her throne, but now she was fighting for her freedom, and she was willing to scorch the earth on her way down. Let me ask you, if someone who had terrorized your neighborhood for years tried to sue you after being arrested, would you fight them in court or push for a settlement just to end the nightmare? If you think repealing that amendment was the neighbor's greatest victory yet, tap that like button. It helps these stories spread further. The day of the first hearing dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself understood what lay ahead. I ironed my only suit, something I hadn't worn since my retirement party, and drove to the courthouse with Rachel and Frank. None of us spoke much on the way. The silence carried a weight all its own. When we arrived, Linda was already there. Even in handcuffs, she managed to look smug, her hair perfectly coiffed, her lipstick applied like she was walking into a gala rather than a legal battle. She glanced at me, at Rachel, at Frank, and her lips curled into a thin smile that sent a chill down my spine. Ladies and gentlemen, Rachel muttered, the Queen has arrived. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Neighbors filled the benches, whispering anxiously, as though we were about to witness not just a trial but the fate of Maple Grove itself. Linda's attorney, a slick man in a Navy suit named Mr. Colton, strutted in like he owned the place. He laid his papers neatly on the desk, then leaned over to whisper something in Linda's ear. She chuckled softly, her confidence unshaken. The judge entered, and we all rose. Judge Myers was a no-nonsense woman with steel-gray hair and an expression that could silence a room with a glance. She wasted no time. Case 2000-467 B. Harrison versus Maple Grove Homeowners Association. Ms. Harrison is alleging wrongful termination, harassment, and reputational damages. The defense, represented by Ms. Rachel Carter, contends otherwise. My stomach nodded. This wasn't just about Linda clinging to power, it was about her trying to paint herself as the victim. Colton started strong. He painted Linda as a tireless volunteer, a misunderstood leader who had only ever acted in the community's best interest. He claimed she was targeted by a vindictive mob bent on destroying her reputation. Miss Harrison dedicated years of unpaid service to Maple Grove, he said smoothly, his voice carrying across the courtroom. And how was she repaid? With slander? With baseless accusations? With an orchestrated campaign to remove her unlawfully? I nearly choked. Baseless? I wanted to leap from my chair and shout about the fines, the threats, the foreclosure notices. But Rachel squeezed my arm, silently reminding me, patience. We'll have our turn. And when our turn came, Rachel delivered. She was calm, methodical, and razor-sharp. Your Honor, she began, this case is not about a woman wronged. It's about a woman who abused her power, manipulated bylaws, and bled her neighbors dry for her personal benefit. She produced copies of the absurd fines, $500 for a mailbox, $200 for holiday lights, $50 per day for a child's bike left outside. The courtroom murmured. People shook their heads in disbelief. Then she dropped the bombshell. And when Ms. Harrison realized her control was slipping, she planted a poison pill amendment to force the entire community to pay for her legal fees even in criminal proceedings. That is not leadership. That is extortion. The judge's eyes narrowed. Linda shifted uncomfortably, her smirk finally faltering. But the moment that broke the case wide open came when Rachel called Frank to the stand. Frank, steady as a rock, testified about Linda's threats, the foreclosure letters, the intimidation, the night she stood outside his house at 2 a.m., with a clipboard in hand, scribbling notes like some kind of stalker. Mr. Coleman, Rachel asked, did you feel safe in your own home while Miss Harrison was president? Frank looked directly at Linda. No, and that's the cruelest part. A man should feel safe in his own home, but thanks to her, I didn't. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Even Linda's allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats. By the end of the day, it was clear where things were heading. Judge Myers leaned forward, hands folded. I've heard enough for today, she said firmly. This court finds significant evidence that Miss Harrison abused her position and acted outside the scope of her authority as HOA president. Pending further proceedings, this countersuit will not only be dismissed but sanctions may be considered. The room erupted in whispers. Rachel allowed herself the smallest smile. Linda's face twisted into something I'd never seen before, panic. She hissed something at Colton, who quickly began gathering his papers, avoiding eye contact with anyone. For the first time since this war began, I saw it. A crack in Linda's armor. That night, as neighbors gathered around my porch again, the air was electric. We hadn't won the war yet, but the tide had turned. She's cornered, Rachel said. And when people like her are cornered, they make desperate moves. We need to be ready. I sipped my coffee, the bitterness grounding me. Ready for what? Rachel met my eyes. For her last stand. Reflection question. If you were in our shoes, would you celebrate the courtroom victory or stay cautious, knowing Linda wasn't done fighting yet? If you've been hooked by this courtroom showdown, hit that subscribe button. For a brief moment, it felt like we could breathe again. The judge's words had carried the weight of justice, and the whole neighborhood was buzzing with cautious hope. But Rachel was right. People like Linda didn't simply bow out gracefully. They clung, clawed, and struck when you least expected it. That strike came just 3 days later. It was a Saturday morning when I first noticed something was wrong. I stepped onto my porch with a cup of coffee and nearly spilled it when I saw the signs. Bright neon-colored posters were staked into lawns and taped to lampposts all over Maple Grove. Save our community, stop the mob. Linda Harrison, the real victim. Protect Maple Grove from corruption. Everywhere I looked, Linda's narrative was plastered across the neighborhood. Rachel drove over within an hour, her hair tied back, legal pad already in hand. She yanked one of the signs out of the ground, shaking her head. "She's trying to rally her base," Rachel muttered. "If she can't win in court, she'll try to win in the court of public opinion." And she didn't stop at signs. That afternoon, flyers appeared in mailboxes. They weren't just pamphlets, they were smear campaigns. My name, Frank's name, even Rachel's dragged through the mud. I was called a selfish agitator who wanted to bankrupt the HOA. Frank was labeled a troublemaker with a history of complaints. Rachel was smeared as an ambulance chaser exploiting innocent neighbors. Neighbors started calling me, confused and worried. Some even knocked on my door. "Is this true?" one woman asked, holding the flyer like it was a poisonous snake. Her voice trembled. "Did you really sue the HOA just because of a mailbox?" I wanted to scream, but Rachel, ever the strategist, calmed me. "She's baiting you. Don't react emotionally. We fight this the smart way." But Linda wasn't finished. That night, she called an emergency community meeting in the clubhouse. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to pretend it wasn't happening, but Rachel insisted. "Better to see the battlefield with your own eyes," she said. When we walked in, the room was packed. Neighbors sat shoulder to shoulder, some clutching Linda's flyers, others whispering nervously. And there she was at the front, standing tall, a microphone in hand, her voice dripping with theatrical sorrow. "My dear friends," she began, "I have given my heart and soul to this community, and how have I been repaid? With lies, with slander, with a lawsuit designed to destroy everything we've built." Her words stirred murmurs of sympathy. She gestured dramatically to the crowd. "These people want to bankrupt Maple Grove. They want to dismantle the HOA protections that keep your property values high. And they want to replace order with chaos. Ask yourself who really benefits if they win. Not you, not your families, only them." I felt my blood boil. The room was tilting in her favor. Then Rachel stood. "May I?" she asked calmly, her voice carrying even without a microphone. The room quieted. Rachel didn't waste time. She held up copies of the fines, the foreclosure threats, the poison pill bylaw. "You've all lived here," she said, her voice steady. "You've all seen what happens when power goes unchecked. Tell me, who here has received a fine in the past year?" Hands shot up. Dozens of them. "Who here has been threatened with legal action for something as small as a mailbox, a holiday decoration, or a child's toy?" Even more hands. The room shifted. Murmurs grew louder, not in Linda's favor this time, but against her. Rachel delivered the final blow. "Linda isn't protecting Maple Grove. She's protecting herself. And every dollar you've paid in unjust fines, every sleepless night you've had worrying about foreclosure, that was her doing." The room erupted not in applause, but in outrage. Neighbors shouted questions, demands, accusations. Linda's face paled as the tide turned before her eyes. "This meeting is over," she screeched, slamming the microphone down. "You'll regret this, all of you." She stormed out, her remaining supporters scurrying after her like rats, fleeing a sinking ship. That night, Maple Grove changed forever. For the first time, people weren't afraid to speak openly against Linda. They gathered on porches, in driveways, whispering plans of reform. But deep down, I knew this wasn't her final move. People like Linda didn't vanish quietly into the night. And I was right, because just when we thought the storm had passed, Linda unveiled her most shocking move, yet one that threatened not just the HOA, but the very homes we lived in. If you were at that meeting, would you have had the courage to stand up against Linda or stayed quiet, fearing retaliation? For a few precious days after that explosive meeting, Maple Grove felt lighter. Neighbors smiled at each other in ways I hadn't seen in months. Kids played on the sidewalks without parents nervously peeking out from behind curtains, worried that Linda would fine them for riding scooters on community pavement. But just as I began to believe we'd finally broken her grip, Linda struck back with a vengeance. And this time, she wasn't playing small. It started with a letter. A thick, official-looking envelope slid under my door one evening. At first, I thought it was another court notice. But the seal on the corner wasn't from the HOA. It was from the county recorder's office. I opened it and nearly dropped it. According to the document, Linda, acting under the HOA's authority, had filed a lien against every single home in Maple Grove. Not just mine, not just Frank's. Every house, every neighbor. Rachel got the call minutes later, her phone buzzing with panicked homeowners. She rushed over, hair loose and wild, clutching her laptop. "This isn't just petty fines anymore," she said, scrolling through county records. "She's weaponized the HOA's authority to place liens on the community itself. If she's allowed to enforce this, she could foreclose on anyone." The room spun around me. She's holding the whole neighborhood hostage. That night, an emergency gathering formed in Frank's garage. People crowded inside, clutching copies of the lien notice, faces pale with fear. "She can't do this, right?" one elderly neighbor asked, voice trembling. "We paid off our home 20 years ago. She can't just take it." Rachel inhaled sharply. "Legally, she's skating on thin ice, but technically, she's already filed the paperwork. Which means until we fight it in court, the liens stand." The room fell into stunned silence. Linda had pulled her nuclear option. By the next morning, panic gripped Maple Grove. The local bank refused to refinance mortgages. A family trying to sell their home lost their buyer overnight. Retirees whispered about losing everything they'd worked their whole lives for. And Linda? She strutted through the neighborhood like a conquering queen. I'll never forget her voice as she passed me on the sidewalk, a smug smile plastered across her face. "You thought you'd beat me," she sneered. "But you just made me stronger. Let's see how long your neighbors keep siding with you once their homes are on the line." I clenched my fist so tight my nails dug into my palms. But Rachel's words echoed in my mind. Don't react emotionally. Fight smart. That night, Rachel spread out stacks of documents across my kitchen table. Court filings, HOA bylaws, state statutes. It was a war map, and she was the general. "She's overplayed her hand," Rachel muttered. "Filing a community-wide lien is extreme, and most judges won't stand for it. But she's betting on fear on people folding before this ever gets to court." Frank leaned over the table. "So, how do we stop her?" Rachel's eyes narrowed. "We don't just stop her. We dismantle her power from the ground up. If we can prove fraud, abuse of authority, or misuse of HOA funds, we can petition for her immediate removal. Not just as HOA president, but permanently barred from serving in any HOA in this state." For the first time, I saw fire in Rachel's eyes that almost made me feel sorry for Linda. Almost. But we all knew the stakes. This wasn't about a mailbox anymore. This wasn't even about unfair fines. This was about whether we would lose our homes. And as neighbors whispered, plotted, and rallied, one thing became clear. Maple Grove was no longer divided. Linda's last move had united us in a way nothing else could. We weren't just fighting for ourselves anymore. We were fighting for the soul of our community. Reflection question. If someone threatened your home, the very roof over your head, would you stand and fight, or give in to protect your peace? The liens were Linda's boldest strike yet, but they also created something she hadn't expected: unity. For the first time, Maple Grove wasn't divided between the fearful and the defiant. We were all in the same boat, and the boat was sinking. Rachel knew this was the moment to dig deeper, and what she uncovered would change everything. For 3 straight days, my kitchen became command central. Rachel's laptop hummed, papers sprawled across every surface. Neighbors filtered in and out, bringing coffee, sandwiches, even old HOA meeting minutes they'd saved in dusty folders. "This woman has been in power for years," Rachel muttered, scrolling furiously. "People like that leave a trail. We just have to find it." On the 3rd evening, as exhaustion weighed heavy on all of us, Rachel froze. Wait. She enlarged a PDF on her screen, an old HOA financial report from 2 years back. At first glance, it looked ordinary. Landscaping fees, maintenance, community events. But then Rachel zoomed in on one line item buried near the bottom. Legal consulting fees. Fame für null. She pulled up the following year's records. Same line. Same vague description. Different amount. Legal. Consulting fees. 250. Null. Her eyes lit up. She's been funneling HOA money into a shell expense. Frank leaned forward. What does that mean? Rachel's voice sharpened. It means she's been writing checks out of the HOA account for consulting, but there's no record of an actual law firm, no invoices, no contracts. If I'm right, Linda's been paying herself, or a fake company. The room fell silent. Linda wasn't just a tyrant, she was a thief. The next morning, Rachel marched into the county clerk's office with Frank and me trailing behind. She requested copies of corporate filings connected to the names listed on the HOA's expenditures. When the clerk handed over the stack, Rachel rifled through the papers until she stopped at one. A smirk crossed her face. Got her. The company receiving the consulting fees had been registered under a different name, but the signature on the form? Linda. Linda herself had created a fake LLC, funneled tens of thousands of dollars into it, and disguised it as legal costs. This isn't just misconduct, Rachel whispered. This is embezzlement. Felony-level embezzlement. That night, in Frank's garage, the neighbors gathered again. Rachel stood at the front, holding up copies of the incriminating documents like evidence in a courtroom. She's been stealing from all of us, Rachel declared. Every dollar she took was money that should have gone to community upkeep, events, or savings. Instead, she pocketed it. Gasps filled the garage. Angry whispers erupted. Even the quietest, most fearful residents clenched their fists in fury. Linda had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But Rachel wasn't finished. We can take this to court, she said, her voice strong. But it's bigger than that. We're talking about fraud charges, jail time, the end of her career, her reputation, everything. Frank's jaw tightened. And if she finds out we're preparing this case? Rachel hesitated. Then she'll double down. And she still controls the HOA for now. The air grew heavy. We had the smoking gun, but using it meant war. That night, lying awake, I realized the truth. We weren't just resisting Linda anymore. We were preparing to destroy her. If you discovered proof that someone powerful was stealing from your entire community, would you risk everything to expose them or stay silent to avoid the storm that would follow? If Rachel's discovery had been a spark, then Linda's reaction was gasoline on an open flame. It started small, subtle signs that she suspected something. One morning, Frank found his mailbox door ripped clean off the hinges. A week later, Rachel received a warning letter claiming her property landscaping was in violation of community standards. The so-called violation? A single flower pot on her porch. Then, my turn came. I walked outside one morning to find a bright red notice taped to my front door. Immediate HOA violation. Non-compliance with paint code. Fine. $750. The kicker? I hadn't repainted a thing since moving in. Linda wasn't just enforcing rules, she was fabricating them. At first, we brushed it off as harassment, her desperate attempt to intimidate us. But then came the move none of us had expected. Rachel's phone buzzed one night while we were reviewing documents at Frank's garage. She looked down, then froze. Her voice shook as she read aloud. This is a formal notice of foreclosure proceedings against your property due to unpaid HOA dues and violations. Gasps rippled through the garage. Foreclosure? Frank thundered. That's insane. Rachel clenched the paper in her hand. I've paid every single fee. I even have receipts. But Linda didn't care about facts. She cared about power. And foreclosure was the nuclear option. By the next morning, 3 more neighbors had received the same letter. Linda wasn't just threatening us anymore. She was willing to ruin lives, take homes, strip people of everything they'd built. She knows we're onto her, Rachel whispered. This is her way of saying she'll burn the whole place down before she lets us expose her. For the first time since we'd started, I felt fear crawl into my chest. What if Linda really could do this? What if she could take our homes, sell them out from under us, and leave us ruined before the truth ever saw daylight? But Rachel, stubborn as ever, leaned forward and whispered like a general rallying her troops. This only proves how desperate she is. We can't stop now. If we give in, she wins. But if we push forward, we can end her. The room fell silent. Everyone's faces flickered with the same mix of fear and resolve. Linda had gone on the offensive. She was swinging wildly, hoping to knock us down. But all she'd really done was confirm what we already knew: she was guilty. Still, the stakes had changed. This wasn't just about HOA fines or petty rules anymore. This was about survival. Because if we failed, Linda wouldn't just humiliate us. She'd destroy us. If you were facing foreclosure as retaliation for standing up to corruption, would you keep fighting, or would you walk away to protect your family and peace of mind? When Linda sent those foreclosure threats, most people would have panicked, maybe even packed up and left. But Rachel wasn't like most people. "She thinks she's scaring us into silence," Rachel said, pacing Frank's garage like a lawyer in the middle of trial prep. "But she just gave us her biggest mistake yet." Frank frowned. "Her biggest mistake? She's threatening to take our homes." "Exactly." Rachel's eyes lit with fire. "Foreclosure isn't just a letter you send because you're mad. It requires a paper trail: bank records, unpaid dues, legal filings. If she's threatening us without real grounds, she's committing fraud. And fraud is something the state attorney general can't ignore." For the first time since the threats arrived, I felt a sliver of hope. Rachel's plan was bold, almost dangerous. Step 1. Collect every letter, notice, and fine Linda had issued, especially the foreclosure threats. Step 2. Compare those against actual bank receipts, proof of dues paid, and the HOA's official bylaws. Step 3. Hand everything over to the county prosecutor, along with an official petition signed by as many neighbors as possible. But Rachel didn't stop there. She wanted to catch Linda in the act. If she's falsifying foreclosure notices, she's either forging documents or misusing HOA funds to hire shady lawyers. We need proof. Proof she's funneling money where it doesn't belong. That's when Frank stepped in. "I know a guy," he said with a mischievous grin. "Retired auditor, used to work for the IRS. If anyone can sniff out financial fraud, it's him." 2 nights later, in the dim light of Frank's garage, we met Carl. He was wiry, gray-haired, and had a sharpness in his eyes that made me believe he could spot a forged receipt from across the room. Within minutes of scanning Linda's letters, he chuckled darkly. "She's sloppy," he muttered. "This foreclosure notice? Wrong template, wrong filing codes. And see this?" He tapped a number at the bottom of the page. "This isn't a legal case number. It's something she made up." Our jaws dropped. Linda hadn't just bent the rules, she'd fabricated legal documents. "That's prison time," Carl said flatly. "If you can tie this to misuse of HOA funds, she won't just lose her position. She'll be wearing an orange jumpsuit." Rachel saw the opening and sharpened it into a blade. "We're going to let Linda think she's winning," she whispered, her voice heavy with determination. "She'll keep sending these fake foreclosure threats, and when she does, we'll have the smoking gun. Then, we deliver it to the authorities with every neighbor's signature, demanding her removal." The trap was set. All we had to do was wait. But as we left Frank's garage that night, a cold shiver ran down my spine. Because I knew one thing Linda was better at than anyone else. She didn't go down quietly. And once she realized we were fighting back, she'd come at us harder than ever. If you discovered proof that someone in power was forging legal documents, would you confront them directly or secretly build a case to take them down? The trap was set, but Linda must have smelled the shift in the air. Maybe she sensed we were no longer afraid. Or maybe bullies like her can just feel when control is slipping. Because a week after Carl uncovered the forged foreclosure papers, Linda struck harder than ever. It started small, petty, even. Suddenly, trash pickup skipped my house, and the sanitation company claimed they'd been told my property was delinquent. Then my mailbox was stuffed with anonymous notes. "You don't belong here." Frank's sprinkler system was mysteriously slashed, flooding his yard. Mrs. Alvarez's garden was trampled overnight. Her roses shredded like someone had stomped them out of spite. "She's sending us a message," Rachel muttered, holding one of the torn roses like it was evidence from a crime scene. But then it escalated. One evening, as I was locking up for the night, my porch lights flickered and went dark. I figured it was a power surge, until I noticed the wires had been deliberately cut. That's when fear started gnawing at me. This wasn't just fines and letters anymore. Linda was taking it off the paper and into our lives. And the worst was yet to come. 3 days later, Frank rushed into my yard, his face pale. "They put a lien on my house," he gasped. "An actual lien." Rachel snatched the paper from his hand, scanning it, her brow furrowed deeper and deeper before she finally whispered, "This one's real." We stared at her in disbelief. "What do you mean, real?" I thought she was just faking paperwork. Rachel nodded grimly. She was. "But this means she's convinced a judge to approve a filing. She's not just bluffing anymore, she's found a way into the legal system." My stomach turned to ice. If Linda could manipulate the courts, our little trap wouldn't be enough. We weren't just fighting an HOA president anymore. We were fighting a woman who knew how to bend the law to her will. That night, in Frank's garage, the group was more shaken than I'd ever seen. Some neighbors whispered about backing down, terrified of losing their homes. But Rachel slammed her hand on the table. "That's exactly what she wants, fear. We can't flinch now. If we back off, she wins, and every one of us will be at her mercy forever." Her voice cracked with intensity. "Listen to me. Linda's getting desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. We're closer than ever to bringing her down." For the first time, I saw the flicker of doubt in Rachel's eyes. She believed her own words, but she also knew the stakes had just skyrocketed. When someone escalates from petty harassment to real legal attacks, would you stand and fight harder or retreat to protect your peace? Linda must have thought she was invincible. She had the paperwork, the intimidation, and a track record of crushing anyone who dared to oppose her. But when people are cornered, when their homes and families are on the line, something changes. That change came the following Saturday. The HOA had called an emergency meeting. Flyers were taped to mailboxes, shoved under doors, and posted on the community board. The subject line was simple, almost smug: enforcement actions and homeowner compliance. Rachel whispered to me as we walked into the clubhouse that evening, "This is it. She's going public with her threats." The room was packed, dozens of neighbors, some angry, some nervous, all of them whispering. At the front, Linda stood tall, her blonde bob perfectly styled, a thick binder in front of her like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice oozing authority, "it has come to my attention that certain residents believe they are above the rules. This association cannot function if we allow disobedience to fester." She opened her binder and started pulling out papers. "Here, I have documented violations, trash cans visible, lawn heights exceeding standards, unapproved exterior paint colors, and yes, liens for non-compliance." She slapped the papers onto the podium, each sound like a gunshot echoing through the room. Frank muttered under his breath, "She's really going for it." Then Linda locked eyes on me. "And some residents," she said slowly, "have gone as far as to spread lies, to accuse this board me of misconduct. But let me be clear, the law is on my side, and anyone who continues to defy me will lose their homes. That is not a threat. That is a promise." Gasps rippled through the crowd. For the first time, I saw not just fear in my neighbors' faces, but anger. Rachel stood abruptly, her voice slicing through the silence. "Funny thing about promises, Linda, they have to be backed up with truth. And you've been peddling lies for months." Linda's eyes narrowed. "Sit down, Ms. Myers. This is my meeting." Rachel held her ground. "Not anymore." She reached into her bag and pulled out a thick stack of papers, slamming them down on the same podium Linda had been using. "These," she declared, "are certified records, real ones, not the forgeries you've been circulating. And they prove that at least half the fines and liens you've issued were fabricated or illegally filed." The room buzzed with shock. Linda's face went red. You have no authority to present that." Rachel smirked. "I don't need authority, Linda. I have proof." Then she turned to the crowd, holding up one document in particular. "This right here? A foreclosure notice against Mr. Johnson, except the notary stamp doesn't exist. We checked with the state registry. Linda created it." A murmur of outrage spread like wildfire. Neighbors leaned in, whispering, some shouting. For the first time, Linda's grip on the room slipped. And then, like a fuse reaching the powder keg, Mrs. Alvarez, quiet, gentle Mrs. Alvarez, stood up and shouted, "You destroyed my garden. You slashed my roses. Enough is enough." The room erupted. People were on their feet, yelling, pointing fingers, demanding answers. Linda tried to shout them down, but her voice cracked under the noise. Her binder slipped from her hands, papers scattering like confetti across the clubhouse floor. For the first time, the queen of control was losing control. Rachel leaned close to me and whispered, "She's rattled. One more push and she'll bury herself." When a bully starts to lose control, is it better to press harder while they're vulnerable or step back and let them implode on their own? I thought Linda might retreat after that disastrous meeting. Any reasonable person would have realized her reign was slipping, that the neighborhood was waking up. But Linda wasn't reasonable. She wasn't even rational anymore. She was dangerous. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of shattering glass. At first, I thought it was a dream. But then Rachel's voice cut through the darkness. "Get up now." I stumbled out of bed, my heart hammering. In the kitchen, the window above the sink had been smashed, shards glinting under the moonlight. A brick sat on the floor, surrounded by glass. Attached to it was a note, written in thick, angry letters. "Quit while you still can." Rachel's hands shook as she held the note. "She's escalating," she whispered. "She won't stop until someone gets hurt." The police came, flashing lights cutting across the front lawn. An officer took down my statement, glanced at the note, and sighed. "No cameras? No witnesses?" he asked. I shook my head. "Then our hands are tied. Unless you catch her in the act, it's just vandalism with no suspect." Rachel clenched her fists. "She's the suspect. We all know it." The officer gave her a look that said everything. Suspicion wasn't enough. The next morning, as if nothing had happened, Linda strutted around the neighborhood. She smiled sweetly at passers-by, watering her perfectly trimmed hedges, her little dog trotting behind her. When our eyes met across the street, she smirked. Just a faint curl of her lips, but it said, "I own you." My stomach twisted. That same afternoon, Mrs. Alvarez called in tears. She had my car towed, David, right from my driveway. Said it was unregistered, but it's fully insured, fully plated. I called the tow company. They said Linda paid them personally to do it. Then Frank called. "She's spreading rumors now. Told half the street I'm a felon, that I forged my loan documents. My boss heard. I could lose my job over this." It was like Linda had declared war on anyone who stood against her. Rachel gathered us that evening in my living room. Me, Frank, Mrs. Alvarez, and a handful of other neighbors who'd been targeted. Her eyes were blazing. "She's cornered, which makes her desperate. She's not going to stop until one of us breaks. That means we can't just play defense anymore. We have to hit back. Hard." I asked the question on everyone's mind. But how? She's already twisting the system against us. Rachel smiled grimly. "Then we stop fighting her on her terms. We set a trap she can't resist walking into, and this time, we make sure the whole world sees it." That night, as I lay awake listening to the creaks of the house, I realized something. This wasn't about fines, or lawns, or HOA politics anymore. Linda had turned it into something personal. And personal wars only end 2 ways: total surrender or total destruction. When someone crosses the line from harassment to outright intimidation, is the only answer to strike back harder, or is there still room to outsmart them peacefully? Rachel came to my house the next morning with a folder so thick it looked like she'd raided a law library. She set it down on my dining table and opened it like she was revealing treasure. Inside were copies of HOA bylaws, state statutes, recorded testimonies, and a spreadsheet that made my head spin. "This," she said, tapping the folder, "is Linda's downfall. But we can't just take it to court yet. We need her to incriminate herself in a way she can't deny. That's where the trap comes in." She leaned forward, her voice low and steady. "Linda thrives on intimidation, right? So, we bait her into going too far into making a threat or demand that crosses the legal line. And we catch it on record. Not just for the board, not just for the police, but for the entire community to see." "How do we make her bite?" Frank asked, skeptical. Rachel's eyes gleamed. "By letting her think she's winning. We give her an opening she can't resist." The plan was risky. Stage a compliance violation. Something minor but visible enough to get under Linda's skin, like Mrs. Alvarez parking her car improperly on the curb again. Record everything. Hidden cameras, body mics, even neighbors standing by with phones ready. Push her buttons. If Linda stormed over, if she issued fines, or worse, personal threats, we'd finally have her. And if she doesn't take the bait? I asked. Rachel smirked. She will. Linda can't resist the chance to humiliate someone publicly. It's her addiction. That evening, Mrs. Alvarez parked her car halfway across the curb, exactly how Linda hated it. The rest of us positioned ourselves like actors waiting for the curtain to rise. Frank mowed his lawn. Rachel pretended to chat with me on the porch. Two neighbors walked their dogs slowly down the street with phones out. The neighborhood buzzed with tension, like a stage waiting for its villain. And right on cue, Linda appeared. Her heels clicked against the pavement, her little dog scampering beside her. She stopped dead in front of Mrs. Alvarez's car, her face twisting, like she'd just smelled something foul. "Unbelievable!" she screeched, loud enough for the entire block to hear. She marched up to Mrs. Alvarez's front door and pounded on it. When the poor woman opened it, Linda unleashed a storm. "You're violating Section 12B again. I told you if you pulled this stunt one more time, I'd have your property liened. Do you want to lose your house? Because I'll take it from you. Do you understand me?" Gasps rippled through the watching neighbors. Phones recorded every word. But Linda wasn't done. She leaned closer, lowering her voice just enough that she thought no one else could hear. "And if you think those little meetings you're having are going to stop me, you're dead wrong. I'll bury you all in lawsuits until you can't breathe." Rachel's eyes met mine from across the street. She gave the smallest nod. We had it. Linda had finally gone too far. When someone exposes their own corruption out of arrogance, should you rush to use it immediately? Or wait until the right moment to strike so the impact is undeniable? The next HOA board meeting was packed. Word had spread like wildfire after Linda's outburst at Mrs. Alvarez's house. Almost every homeowner showed up, faces tense, whispers echoing in the community hall. For once, the room wasn't filled with resignation and fear. It was filled with anticipation. Linda sat at the head of the table, smug as ever, tapping her pen like a queen, waiting for her subjects to bow. She cleared her throat dramatically. "Before we begin tonight's agenda," she announced, "I want to address the blatant disregard for community rules that's been happening. Certain residents think they can test this board. Let me remind you all, fines will be issued, and liens will follow if necessary. We are not running a charity here." A few gasps and mutters spread through the crowd, but Rachel stood up calmly, her lawyer's poise impossible to ignore. "Actually, Linda," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "we'd like to address something else tonight, something far more serious." Rachel placed a laptop on the table, angled toward the board. "This community deserves the truth, and fortunately, we have it recorded." She pressed play. Linda's voice filled the hall, sharp and venomous. "You're violating Section 12. Begin. Do you want to lose your house? Because I'll take it from you." The room erupted. Neighbors gasped. Some whispers shouted, "Unbelievable," or "She really said that." Then came the second part, the quieter, more sinister line Linda thought no one had heard. "And if you think those little meetings you're having are going to stop me, you're dead wrong. I'll bury you all in lawsuits until you can't breathe." The effect was devastating. For the first time, Linda's mask cracked. She sputtered, stood up, and slammed her palm on the table. "This is out of context. You people don't understand the responsibilities I carry." But she was drowned out by the crowd. "You threatened us. You're abusing your power. Step down, Linda." Even the board members, her once loyal allies, shifted uncomfortably. One of them, Mr. Carver, cleared his throat. "Linda, this is indefensible. You can't threaten homeowners with foreclosure. It's illegal." Rachel seized the moment. Actually, under state law, what Linda has been doing could qualify as harassment and abuse of authority. And this evidence isn't just for the board, it's admissible in court. The room fell silent, all eyes snapping back to Linda. She paled, clutching her papers like a shield. For the first time since I'd moved into the neighborhood, Linda looked small. Then Mrs. Alvarez stood, her voice trembling but strong. We were afraid of you, Linda. But not anymore. One by one, neighbors rose to their feet. Frank, Mr. Jennings, even quiet old Mrs. Patterson with her cane. We want a vote of no confidence, someone shouted. Yes, remove her, another echoed. The hall thundered with agreement. Linda tried to shout them down, but her voice was swallowed by the collective power of a community that had finally had enough. By the end of the night, the motion was official. Linda was stripped of her presidency. She stormed out of the hall, muttering about lawsuits and revenge, but it was too late. Her grip on the neighborhood was broken, and for the first time, as people hugged, laughed, and cried around me, it felt like the community was finally ours. When a tyrant finally falls, should we savor their humiliation or focus on rebuilding what they broke? The removal from the HOA presidency should have been the end of it, but Linda was not the kind of woman to slink away quietly. Within 2 weeks, official letters began arriving in our mailboxes, lawsuits filed in her name against several of us, accusing us of defamation and illegal conspiracy. Rachel wasn't surprised. She's desperate, she told us during one late-night strategy meeting. This is her last play. But desperation makes people sloppy. The day of the hearing, the courthouse lobby buzzed with tension. Our little neighborhood group sat together in one row, Frank with his arms folded, Mrs. Alvarez clutching her rosary beads, me tapping my knee nervously. Across the aisle, Linda sat alone at her table, dressed in an expensive navy suit that screamed arrogance more than professionalism. She smirked when her eyes met mine. "Ready to lose your homes," she whispered as we passed. Rachel leaned down and whispered back, calm as ever, "Ready to lose your last illusion of power?" The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Linda launched into her performance immediately, voice dripping with fake dignity. "Your Honor, I gave years of my life to protecting my community, and in return, I was smeared, plotted against, and illegally recorded by these ingrates. All I did was enforce the rules, as any responsible HOA president would." For a moment, I worried the judge might buy it. Linda had always been persuasive, always able to twist the truth until it sounded almost reasonable. But then Rachel stood, and her calm precision dismantled Linda's facade piece by piece. "Your Honor," Rachel began, "the question isn't whether rules exist, it's how those rules were enforced. We have documented cases of fines being issued without board approval. We have neighbors threatened with foreclosure over trivial matters like mailbox paint. And we have—" She turned to the projector screen. "Recordings." The courtroom hushed as Linda's voice boomed through the speakers. "You're violating Section 12B again. Do you want to lose your house? Because I'll take it from you." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The judge's eyebrows shot up. And then came the damning whisper, "I'll bury you all in lawsuits until you can't breathe." Linda's composure cracked like glass. That's not fair, that's entrapment," she stammered. But the judge's gavel struck the bench. "Enough. The evidence speaks for itself." Rachel wasn't finished. She pulled out a thick binder. "These are financial records, misappropriated HOA funds that Linda authorized. Thousands of dollars redirected into accounts linked to her personal use. Landscaping projects that never happened. Repairs billed twice. The community wasn't just mismanaged. It was defrauded." The room erupted again, gasps and whispers filling every corner. Linda's face went pale, then red, then pale again. She scrambled for words, but nothing came. For once, her tongue, her sharpest weapon, failed her completely. The judge leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "Mrs. Wallace, this is not just a matter of bad leadership. This borders on criminal activity. I am referring this evidence to the district attorney's office for review. In the meantime, your lawsuits are dismissed in their entirety. You abused your authority, and you will answer for it." The gavel struck again. Final. Absolute. I glanced at Rachel, who gave me the faintest nod. Across the aisle, Linda slumped in her chair, utterly defeated. Her reign, her threats, her iron grip, it was all gone. For the first time since moving into that house, I felt free. As we left the courthouse, neighbors hugged and laughed, the tension that had suffocated us for years finally lifting. Mrs. Alvarez wiped tears from her cheeks. "We did it. We really did it. Rachel smiled softly. No, you did it. You stood up, you fought back, and you won. When justice is finally served, is the sweetest victory the punishment of the oppressor or the freedom of those they oppressed? The weeks after the courtroom showdown felt like waking from a long nightmare. For years, our neighborhood had lived under Linda's shadow, fearful of her fines, her threats, her letters that arrived like small bombs in our mailboxes. But now, that shadow was gone. At first, the silence felt strange. No new violations taped to our doors. No board meetings ambushed by Linda's scolding. For the first time in years, I stepped onto my porch, coffee in hand, and heard nothing but the soft hum of morning birds. It was freedom. Quiet, simple freedom. But freedom wasn't the same as healing. Some houses still bore scars, lawns neglected after years of harassment, fences left half-painted after fines had halted projects, and neighbors, once wary of one another, carried lingering distrust. Linda had thrived on division, turning us against ourselves. One evening, Frank gathered us in his garage. "We've been through hell," he said, his gruff voice softer than I'd ever heard. "But if we let this place stay broken, then Linda still wins." That night, we decided to rebuild not just fences and mailboxes, but trust. We formed a new HOA board, this time with transparency, accountability, and kindness as its pillars. Mrs. Alvarez was voted in as treasurer, her careful hands ensuring honesty in every dollar spent. Frank, despite grumbling, accepted the role of vice president, and Rachel, though she declined an official seat, offered to draft new bylaws that protected homeowners from abuse of power. Our first act wasn't about rules at all. It was about community. We organized a neighborhood barbecue on the green. Long tables stretched across the grass, covered with casseroles, pies, and old family recipes. Kids ran barefoot, laughter echoing in the air. For the first time, neighbors who hadn't spoken in years sat side by side, swapping stories and passing plates. And for the first time since moving in, I felt like I belonged. As the sun dipped low, I looked around at the faces glowing in the warm light. The fences Linda had used to divide us were still standing, but in spirit, they had come down. Rachel nudged me gently. "You see," she whispered, "justice isn't just about what you take away from someone like Linda. It's about what you give back to the people she hurt." I let those words settle in, because she was right. Linda's downfall wasn't the real victory. This was the laughter, the trust, the fragile but steady heartbeat of a neighborhood learning to live again. Later that night, as I walked back to my porch, I paused and looked at my house, the house I had once feared losing. It wasn't just wood and brick. It was the dream I had worked for, the place I had fought for, and now, finally, the home I could live in without fear. For the first time in years, I whispered to myself, "I'm home." And this time, it felt true. When a community survives years of fear and control, what truly heals it in the end, justice in court, or kindness in how people choose to rebuild together?